Hello, and welcome to the Storage Group Spotlight, a new series of video content produced exclusively for self-storage. Today, I'm joined by Larry Hanks and Brian Pelski, both men who were instrumental to the founding of the Storage Group. In celebrating our recent Most Innovative Product Award for our work on ClickandStor Online Rental Suite, I wanted to sit down and go over the history of the company with two men who were instrumental in building the foundation. So, guys, tell me, how did you get into real estate and self-storage?
Thanks, Russell. Let me jump in here on that question. I both Larry Hanks and I were commercial real estate appraisers back in the late 80s and early 90s. I personally was a real estate major in college, and so that's how I got my start there. I think, Larry, what, you were in financing?
Yeah, I was in finance, and I'd also worked with my father, who was a foreclosed home buyer, and so I helped him in that regard. So I had an understanding of real estate, and then of course with a finance degree, and that's how I ended up in the appraisal industry initially.
Yeah, so I have a family background as well in real estate in both the development and construction and even operation side of things. And so kind of followed in my father's footsteps as well. So commercial real estate appraising was sort of an entryway into that for me. And 4 to 5 years into that, I had an opportunity to jump into the self-storage industry in the development side of things, having appraised a number of self-storage facilities over the prior 5 years. So I took advantage of that opportunity, joined with a local company in the Orlando area that had partnered with a real estate investment trust, and we were on a growth path. So about 4 years into that, we were looking to expand on the development side again, and that's when I reached out to Larry and asked him to join the company.
Yeah, that
So
worked for me because I was appraising. My specialty was in hospitality hotels. So Brian understood, since he had we had been working together, that I was understood the analysis of counting heads and beds on a nightly basis, and that he could bring me over, and it would be a basically a plug and play for boxes and locks on a monthly basis.
yeah, so initially it was primarily that. It was a lot of analysis. It was feasibility studies. It was market studies. We would go into a market like Orlando or Tampa or Miami, and we would actually go visit every single facility in that market. So Tampa, for example, had like 210 back in 1996, and Orlando had about 200, and so forth. So together, Larry and I talk about actually probably visiting over 1,000 facilities in person between the two of us.
And keep in mind, this is at a time, computers obviously are so prevalent now, and you can get rates and all kinds of things now. But at the time, there was none of that. So any rates or occupancy information, or physical quality information of the facilities, you didn't know it unless you actually went there and had a conversation with someone, which was not always easy to do.
So we had a great opportunity as over a number of years to then be in a position that we could invest. So we became investors in self storage. And then at certain points along the way, I was called on to address some operational issues. I certainly oversaw some of the construction aspects of it. So I started to wear basically every hat in the industry in some form or fashion, probably except for technology. So it's kind of interesting that ultimately we started a technology company in the self-storage industry and have now been recognized as best of business, which is a tremendous honor.
Yeah, and so that's the good news, is that without that, we were able to pave a new road and actually set a new standard for those methods.
Okay, so 11 years ago, you both founded the storage group. What was the self-storage market like? What did you guys think needed to be changed?
Well, with regard to technology, I've really got two words for that. The industry was primitive and it was rather secretive. So, in the decade prior to the startup of the storage group, which was in 2010, it was a time where you had the advent of some levels of technology. You had desktop websites, you had call centers. The REITs were just coming out with call centers in the early 2000s. Like I said, websites were just a new thing in the early 2000s. You started having cloud-based property management software, and then there were these words all around search engine marketing. So you had search engine optimization and pay-per-click and those sorts of terms. Um, but but a lot of question on what all that meant. Um, and so in 2010, we were in the midst of that Great Recession and really an overbuilt storage market. No one was really building at the time, and a lot of the operators were really trying to find a way to lease up or build back their occupancy levels. At the time, Larry and I were really sort of in a hiatus from the development and the operation side, and we were looking around at what we could do during this downturn in the economy. But we were still silent investors in a number of facilities. We still had that opportunity, and we kept noticing on our profit and loss statements this one line item called online marketing. And the more we asked about it, the less we really learned. All we heard about was some of the words I said before. Well, that's for website, that's for hosting, that's for these terms, search engine optimization and pay-per-click. Well, what does that mean? Nobody could really give us a defined answer, but we saw that it kept growing. Um, and but it was just still all lumped together. So that's why I said secrecy. Um, and we had some good friends in the industry, in the technology sector, but on the hospitality side. And we reached out to them and talked to them just sort of casually, right, Larry? It was just sort of a casual conversation
Yeah.
about what are you doing right now during the downturn, and sort of looking for something to do. So we mentioned that to them. Go ahead, Larry.
Well, yeah, and so in those conversations, we learned that they had a really neat approach to as to how they were marketing the hotels. Many times in the larger REITs, they would want to put all of the hotels around the industry, around the world, onto a kind of the same website. But they knew through some of their testing that individual websites for individual hotels and properties performed much better, and the owners, the individual owners, could make judgment decisions on how much they would want to spend to bring in what kind of market or customers to them. So it was then that we recognized we had an opportunity to benefit from what their lessons learned were in the hospitality industry and apply that directly to self-storage. To Brian's point earlier, since we did not have that transparency, we really wanted to bring the transparency part to the self-storage industry. That's particularly helpful when you're dealing with people who are not used to at all this new technology into the workplace.
So our friends in the hospitality industry went out and they did some due diligence for us. They looked to see who was doing, who was working in a similar fashion as they were. And they came back and they really didn't see the depth of marketing in our industry, the self-storage market industry, as they have in hospitality. And further along those lines, they felt as if our industry was about 5 to 7 years behind the hospitality industry. So to take it a step further, before we truly launched, I guess it was right around the time we launched, we brought them out to the Self-Storage Association convention in Las Vegas in August of 2010. And lo and behold, the intro speech from the then current president, he got up and basically the keynote was, let's discuss how the self-storage industry is about 5 to 7 years behind the self-storage industry. Our friends there looked over at us and thought, did you actually write this script for them? I mean, that was their takeaway. And so we knew we were onto something then, and then began our efforts to develop the storage group, and start utilizing some of these systems and technologies that were out there but not being used by the self-storage industry.
So back on the idea that the industry was primitive and sort of secretive about everything, would you say that this inspired you guys to move on to traditional marketing methods, or what was it that would you would say?
Well, it was a serendipitous moment that the technology industry was starting to expand, um, and so we saw this coming. We just didn't quite know how that was going to work yet until we dove into it, and were able to learn some of what we talked about with our hospitality partners. Um, but at the time, all we had really were either mail outs, which can be quite expensive, and yellow page marketing, which is also quite expensive. So we saw a real opportunity to start to reach out more globally, I should really say regionally and nationally, for people who were wanting to move around the country and come into an area. Now they would be able to see the quality of the facility and be able to make a phone call to get the rates and such before they were to move into the area.
Yeah,
And so,
hey Larry, it's important to think about that. So the yellow pages play such a prominent role, and again, we were so primitive in our marketing back then that if you surveyed folks back around 2010 and said, where are you bringing customers from, it was pretty common for people that had a decent presence in a market to say, 60-70% of our folks drive by, they see us, we're where they shop, they're where their kids go to school, and that sort of stuff. And then the other 30 to 40% was they would find us in yellow pages. If you were to then fast forward another 5 years or so to 2015, 14, something like that, you really saw the change happen. And if you ask that same question, it then was, well, maybe 30% see us as they drive by, about 30% uh, would uh, would find us online now, and about another 30% or 20% was yellow pages. Well, then fast forward another 5 years, and you don't even hear the word yellow pages. It's been really transitional, and now what you tend to hear is it's more like the 60 to 70% are finding you online first, and then they usually are reminded that, oh, I do drive by you and see you often as well. Of course, that's if you have a location out on a prominent road, but it certainly opened the door up for operators to develop behind a shopping center or down the street or even an industrial park, because now there's a forum for them to compete online, and is something that we were able to expand upon and really help out a number of operators that had locations such as that.
so that really got us to the point of the desktop website as they were kind of originally construed. And from there, we knew that we wanted to bring mobile websites as part of self-storage. And at the time, they didn't exist other than to look at a full-size website on a smartphone screen, which, as we all know, that doesn't work that well. And so,
And you know what?
just
It was amazing. It was amazing to me back in 2010, 2011, or what you have, how few people that would come by our booths even had just a website in period. They would rely maybe on a Google Places ad, um, if that. I mean, many didn't even have a website of any sort.
hmm So once we were able to accomplish that, you can imagine their excitement. Some of these mom and pop uh, owners, and now they also have an opportunity to have a mobile website, which is extremely new, and knowing that everybody's running around with this opportunity to find them in their pocket. And so with those mobile websites, we were able to then start to see into the future a little bit about what it was capable of, and that was really the genesis of Click and Store, to be able to do some online movements.
So that was our first kind of breakthrough, and that happened literally within about 6 months. That people people and companies had mobile. They had mobile, but it was a separate URL. You would typically have a, Joe's Self Storage Mobi or an m.joestorage.com. But you would literally go to one or the other, either to their primary desktop version of their website or to this mobile. So we were able, again, with the technologies of our friends in the hospitality industry, who were doing this already for a number of years, again, probably 5 to 7 years, and that was having an auto redirect in the background. So it would recognize, that search would be recognized as coming from a mobile device or a desktop, and obviously what sort of operating system you had and so forth. And it would auto redirect it to the proper format, which was that was our big first in the industry.
Yeah, that was what 2010 or so, late 2010, early 2011, and then the Click and Store came a few months after that, as you described.
And in terms of technology, I mentioned yellow pages. And so what we've also seen, and we could obviously foresee that, was the exchange of yellow page expense dollars for online. And that was sort of our sales pitch along the way as well, is pretty soon you knew yellow pages was going away. So we were simply saying, look, just utilize those dollars. Let us help you by reallocating those dollars to the online side. And again, back to Larry's point earlier on, and we're here to show you exactly where those dollars are going to be used. How much is on hosting? How much is on maintaining your website? And again, if there was any pay-per-click and or search engine optimization being done on that website.
So, speaking of the shift towards a more online market, where did the idea for Click and Store really come from, as you guys moved on from traditional marketing means?
Well, it actually began a number of years before that. Maybe it was maybe 10 years prior to that. In I'll say our prior lives in the development and operation of self-storage facilities. I mentioned earlier that call centers came in about 2000, 2001. A number of the REITs started rolling them out. And then you started seeing third-party call centers roll out of that as well. And during that time, when we utilized the call center, we thought, wow, we ought to be able to rent these units online. I mean, not online, excuse me, on via the phone. We certainly had somebody sitting there in front of a computer who could fill in all the information and could give them a gate code if you had the codes there handy. Again, this predates a lot of current technology, but one of the things that was certainly challenging was, how do they get a lock? How do they get through the gates and so forth? So when we were renting through the call centers, we would have our operators, our managers at each location, put together a little welcoming bag. It would have a lock in it. It would have maybe a little welcome letter, bottle of water, maybe even a copy of the lease. And we would place that in very select units. And so when you called the call center, they knew which units those were. They could give you that number of that particular unit. They could give you an access code. You could then obviously provide all your information to that person over the phone, and even at that time start making payments over the phone as well. So they would drive in, they would get into the facility, go get their lock, could move in 24/7. So we were sort of surprised that 10 years had passed, and that it really hadn't developed in the online world yet. And so simply, one of the first things we knew we needed to get to was an online rental. So when somebody shows up at that facility at 10 after 5 and the manager left at 5, or on the weekend, maybe when they're closed, that there was an opportunity for that.
And at the time, I started to do a lot of traveling for development around the country. We were seeing that the airline industry were doing things more online from your desktop at home, or kiosks at the airport. But the opportunity was not to have to stand in long lines or have to go to meet up with the airline agent before getting on the airplane. So we thought that would be a really cool thing to have in the self-storage industry. To Brian's point, you show up after hours or on a day when you're closed. Some people do close on certain days, and still be able to capture those rentals. Further, people coming in from out of town, if they've done a search, say for a section of the town they're moving to, then certain self-storage facilities would pop up, and they would be able to start to get an idea where they wanted to stay, which then led us to that next step of ClickandStor, of how do we integrate that into the system.
So, would you say then that Click and Store was more of a response of what you guys saw was missing in the self-storage industry, or more of a natural progression for where self-storage needed to go?
I guess I would say sort of a combination of both. Um, we saw the parallel to other industries, like Larry said, where you could get a ticket to an airline online. You could move into or get a reservation at least for a hotel room online, pay for it, and so that's certainly what inspired us. Um,
Yeah, and then so that's perfect from a desktop moving in from, coming from another city. So now, because otherwise those people would not have access to your yellow page ad, right? Being in another state, let's say, or even another town. And so now to switch over to the mobile website part that we obviously already had in place now, it was a pretty easy transition for us to take that click and store concept, the ability to be able to choose a unit and rent and get a gate code unit number and do a move-in without having to interface with a manager. It just made it much more easy, much more convenient for the customer. We're always trying to give them reasons to continue moving forward, to move in, not reasons to go look down the road at the competitors and do a price shop. We were really serving a convenience at that point, as opposed to allowing them to or encouraging them to go down the street and look at other competitors.
Yeah, and one more thing on the mobile side of things is, to us, we were developing a kiosk in a pocket, as we called it. There were kiosks out in the industry at the time, and they still exist. They're doing well. But again, parallel to the airline industry, there's still kiosks there that serve a purpose. But there's certainly a lot of folks out there that are utilizing their phone just as well. So we certainly recognize that folks were used to moving in a form or fashion without any human interaction. So this was just another extension of that.
Right. And when it was new, when people would come up to the storage facility and there would be a sign saying it was closed, we utilized QR codes at that time. They were fairly new. And so that was pretty easy for someone to click on that, and it would help to get them to the starting point of walking them through the process.
Yeah, so we really help the operators implement this as well. Here's the recommendations for your signage. What should be on it? We had a QR code with certain language. You would also list their website address for those that just wanted to type it in, because even the QR codes, they were so new that you usually had to go out and get an app for it and sort of deal with that aspect of it. That's certainly come a long way as well.
Regardless, we also had the URL up there to be able to just type that in if they weren't familiar with the QR concept, and again get them to the right place for our interface to be able to walk them stepwise through the process and be able to go do a move in less than 5 minutes.
So there was certainly a number of challenges that we had to overcome to roll out ClickandStor. There were APIs, which are basically the connections between different technologies out there. But a lot of them didn't really play well with each other. And we also saw a number of other obstacles out there, such as the fact that all 50 states have 50 different leases. They tell you when and how you can force somebody out of the unit if they're not paying, and late fees and all sorts of stuff. So we were over here thinking, how do we roll out something that puts somebody in a unit in 50 different states, dealing with 50 different leases at a time where there was very little e-sign capability, which was also an issue. Everybody said, "Oh, you've got to come in, you got to produce your driver's license, and you got to sign the lease, and all this paperwork." And we were like, "No, we've got to find a way around this." And so, um, I I was sitting in a sporting event around the time, and for those of you that remember getting an actual paper ticket, I was sitting there, but waiting for an event to start, and I flipped it around and I started looking at the back of it. And that ticket gave me a license to use a seat, to sit in a seat during a specific event or time period. It said on there that you will abide by all the terms and conditions of utilizing our facilities. We can kick you out if you're doing anything improper. And at the end of it, you have to leave. You have to leave. You can't just sit there and wait for the next concert the next day or 2 days down the road. So I took that concept and approached a very well-known leading attorney in the industry with the idea, and said, I would like to move people in under a license agreement. And at the time he said, I've never heard of anybody in the industry suggest that, but I'll do the research and I'll get back to you, which he did. We became a client of his, and he said, not only is it valid in all 50 states, it's valid in all provinces within Canada. So very quickly, we not only had clients all across the United States utilizing ClickandStor, but we had folks throughout Canada as well.
Let me jump in. And so on that license agreement, this was the genesis of where the lease came from. On the license agreement, it was such a blanket coverage for, as Brian just said, Canada and the United States. We didn't have to worry about individual state laws or country laws to get them to do the move-in. That license agreement would say something to the effect of, you have the right to use this unit for a certain period of time. That was until you come in and sign the actual lease that would have been written for that state. So that was the genesis of migrating to the leases. But again, it allowed us to capture the customer right away, get money in the bank right away, keep them from shopping immediately, and they could rely on that, and then within, say, 3 to 5 days, come into the office and sign the actual lease. But it also preserves some rights for the property owner as well, that said at the end of that time period, if you don't show up, then we have the right to do whatever it is they wanted to do in terms of either selling off the goods or some financial penalty to get the customer to come in and sign off on the lease.
Yeah, it basically said that the goods would be abandoned and could be immediately sold. It was, again, legal in all 50 states. But the point of that is that people always want to throw up barriers. Oh, well, this isn't going to work. I've got my own lease. Or I operate in 4 different states. How are you going to utilize this? How am I going to utilize this with 4 different state leases and so forth? We said, that's fine. They're going to get a license to use this space. And like Larry said, there's a fixed time. Well, within 24 hours, 48 hours, 3 days, 5 days, whatever it might be, you have to go into the facility and you have to sign an actual lease. But in the meantime, what we're able to do with our technology, we were able to immediately give them a unit, give them a gate code or access code. We're able to take all their contact information, take payment, and when the manager came in the next morning, the money was in the bank. And we were able to provide a service to these customers, some of which may just happen to have gotten to a facility at 5:15 with a loaded up U-Haul and didn't know what they were going to do next. So, man, we were able to really help some folks out.
11 years later, and ClickandStor Online Rental Suite is now the ISS 2021 Best of Business Most Innovative Product. So, how do you feel like the groundwork you guys laid in the past led to this point, and where do you see Click and Store heading to next?
I actually have to chuckle a bit because we're now receiving the most innovative award, which again is we're very honored to do so. But I chuckle because I think it's about 10 years overdue. You know, this was a product that in 2011, I still remember the very first person to conduct an online rental. And I was actually mowing my lawn and my phone buzzed and I stopped what I did. I looked at it and there was an email from ClickandStore.com, and it said this woman in Orlando had just rented a unit. I got to see a copy of the license agreement that she acknowledged. I got to see the unit number, the gate code, all her contact information, the price she paid, and the confirmation that the money was in the bank, basically. And so earlier I used the word primitive. So I look back here, I look back there 10 years ago, and now I think how primitive Click and Store looks as well, because we've certainly advanced that product tremendously. Not only does it now integrate with half a dozen different property management software providers, we have rolled out some of our own proprietary products and services within it. That's why it's now called an online rental suite. And it's coming into its own here in the last year or two, primarily as a result of the pandemic. It wasn't until that hit did you even see the REITs and the really large operators start to develop their own proprietary online rental uh, products. And that was they were forced into that. They didn't even see the need of it and see how it could expand the business, which we've got the data to show the millions and millions of dollars in value that we've helped operators and our clients build over the last decade. But it really wasn't until the doors were shut, people were getting sick, and they were looking for ways to have the coined phrase contactless rentals now. That's what got their attention. And so it's certainly going to be around, forever now. We're not going to go back to 100% paper and in-person type rentals. And but we've advanced it in a number of ways, not only from the license agreement. Now we have our own e-sign capabilities. We've got lease agreements. You can upload your lease agreements and they can populate based on what state, all the contact information and so forth. So we've brought the product a long way. Nobody has the experience in the online rental segment that we have.
And we'd like to give a little shout out right here to Scott Zucker, the lawyer to whom Brian referred earlier, that helped us through some processes. He was able to work with us on the leases and how those might interplay with Click and Store for people who would like to go ahead and have the lease program as opposed to the license program to do their move-in and Click and Store. Some people still hang on to the license program because they just have this need or desire to be able to shake the hand of their customer and look them in the eye and make them feel welcome. Others,
it's a simple process, and quite honestly, and Scott would confirm this, that it actually provides more rights to the operator. As we said earlier, if you say they need to come in within 24 hours or 48 hours and they don't, those goods become abandoned. That operator can move them out right now and put somebody else into that space. And right now, the market is sizzling hot across the industry right now. And one of the biggest challenges for operators is getting these people out that aren't paying. It can take months and months on end that you have to go and abide by the state statutes to get some folks out. Painful and costing folks a lot of money.
Let us be clear on the fact that there's not an owner out there that really wants to take anybody's stuff. There's a lot
Not
of
at all.
hassle that goes through that. And then obviously they're going to have extra large conversations with the owner who's going to show up one day looking for his stuff. So the goal is not necessarily to uh, take possession of their goods. Is just to give a real big incentive for them to come in and do sign off on their lease.
Let's imagine you both were self-storage operators. What would you say is the biggest draw of ClickandStor Online Rental Suite for you?
I think it's an exceptional product to add to whatever it is you're doing for marketing, for whatever it is you're doing for move in. You know that with a product like ClickandStore, you should not be missing any customers. We all know that things happen sometimes. A manager may be out showing a unit. Somebody comes up to the office that is now closed up, or you may be closed on a Sunday afternoon, or your hours may not have suited somebody that's shown up into town that got delayed traveling in. So this feature of ClickandStore has allowed you to be able to run that facility regardless of whether the manager is there or not. And to the extent that if somebody really wanted to, they could run a completely manless facility with the exception of, when somebody moves out, you'll need somebody to go in and clean the unit.
So we've seen a shift by a number of operators to manless facilities, especially the smaller mom and pops that can save them considerable expense by utilizing a product like ClickandStore, where there isn't necessarily a need for anybody on site other than to clean the facility from time to time. So we've certainly talked about how we got here with ClickandStore, but we certainly have brought it from its infancy 10 years ago to this full online rental suite, and it offers a tremendous number of products and services in and above just simply, but importantly, renting a unit online. I mentioned the SureScan biometric ID verification, so you know who's actually conducting the online rental. We now utilize both leases and license agreements. We have a true e-sign function on that. We customize the leases for you, or you're part of the ClickandStore directory. But in terms of utilizing it, so you go out, you start searching for a storage facility, you come across one that offers an online rental like one of ours. So you pick, the website opens up, you see a list of the units that are available, you click on one, you certainly through the nation page, but then we go a step further. Now we offer insurance coverage. You can select different options for insurance. You can offer discounts and promotions, and those can vary from one facility to the next. You choose which ones you want. And then we have retail products available online as well. Those can be waiting for you or can be drop shipped to you accordingly. And let's see. And then certainly ongoing payments. It becomes that source, and it certainly helps folks out with their accounts receivable. Sign up for whether it's credit card, debit. There's a variety of online payments that ClickandStore can take. Some are integrated with the property management software, and we even have our own payment portals that are available as well for those that may not have a property management software provider. Maybe they're a very small operator and it doesn't make economic sense for them to sign up with a more robust program. That we've got a product for those users as well. So I mean, we continue to add to this. There's nobody out there that has been in the online rental segment of this longer than us. And those that are now providing simple online rentals, certainly have a ways to go to catch up with all the other bells and whistles that we now offer.
Thank you to Larry and Brian for joining me for this first spotlight. It's been very informative, and I hope everybody watching this learned a lot about the history of Click and Store and what Click and Store Online Rental Suite can offer for them. Larry, Brian, do you guys have any concluding remarks today?
Yes, Russell, and I just want to thank you and thank Brian for the over 30 years that we've worked together. It's been a real honor to work alongside somebody with a vision and the talents that you have, and it's also been an honor to be able to bring some future and take self storage to a place it had not been. And I know that you guys will continue to press on with Click and Store and make it even better than it is today. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and I would echo that and say the same to you. Thank you, Russell, for this opportunity. For Larry, our 30 years, I've certainly been through a lot. And I guess I do take some great pride in seeing how we've helped the storage industry. And even more than that is the company that we've created. Um, there's some tremendous individuals that have been with us since day one, and to see them advance in their career and provide an opportunity for them and their families has been the real honor in all of this. So